All right, guys, I just loaded up this world and it seems like people are really enjoying these Reddit stories. So I got another batch of some good ones here today that I'm going to share for you. So let's get started. My neighbor kept stealing my Amazon packages, so I sent him a gift he'll never forget. So this poster said that he has a neighbor named Kyle. Kyle is the kind of guy who thinks everything in a 10-mile radius belongs to him. He's 25, he doesn't have a job, he spends all day sitting on his porch and watching people. About 2 months ago, he noticed, um, about 2 months ago, I noticed my Amazon packages started going missing. At first, I thought it was just the mailman being lazy, but then I got a notification that my new $200 headphones were delivered. I ran to the door in literally 30 seconds and the porch was empty. I looked over at Kyle's house and I saw him quickly ducking inside his front door with a brown box in his hand. I went over, knocked on his door, and asked him if he saw my package. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Nah, man, haven't seen anything. Maybe a porch pirate got it." He was literally wearing the headphones around his neck while he said it. I couldn't prove they were mine yet, but I just knew. I called the police, but they basically told me that unless I had a clear video of his face, they couldn't really do anything. My doorbell camera was broken at the time, so I was stuck. Over the next 2 weeks, he stole more things. He stole a mechanical keyboard, a box of protein bars, and a custom made gift for my mom's birthday, which really broke me. Every time I'd see him, he'd smirk at me. He knew that I knew, and he knew that I couldn't stop him. He kind of felt untouchable, it seemed. He even started unboxing my stuff on his porch while I was pulling into his driveway just to flex on me. I realized that if I bought a new camera, he'd just start wearing a mask. I didn't want him to get a ticket from the cops. I wanted him to be too scared to ever touch a box again, so I started my plan. I have a friend who works at a local pest control company. I called him up and asked him a pretty weird question. "What's the most annoying, non lethal thing that you have?" He told me about this stink bait. It's a thick, oily liquid he used to track where rodents go. It smells like a mixture of rotten eggs, wet dog, and a garbage truck that's been sitting in the sun for a week. The best part is, if you get it on your skin and clothes, it smells for days. You can't just wash it off with soap. I went to the store and bought a big, expensive looking box. I filled it with old bricks so it felt heavy and valuable, then I rigged a glitter bomb style spring inside the lid. But instead of glitter, I put 2 glass vials of the stink bait inside. I set it up so that when the lid opened past a certain point, the spring would snap and crush the vial, spraying the liquid everywhere. To make sure he took the bait, I printed a fake shipping label that said high value electronics in big red letters, and I placed it on my porch at 10 a.m. on Friday. No one Kyle was watching from his window. I went back inside and watched through my window. It didn't even take 5 minutes. Kyle hopped off his porch, sprinted to my house, and grabbed the box and ran back. He was even so excited he couldn't even wait inside to get his prize. He sat down right on his front porch steps to open his prize. I opened my window just a crack so I could hear. He ripped off the tape, he pulled up the cardboard flaps, and snap! Even from 20 feet away, the smell hit like a physical wall. Kyle let out a nasty yell that sounded like a seagull being choked. He dropped the box, and the liquid splashed all over his favorite expensive hoodie and shoes. He started gagging immediately, and he even tried to wipe it off with his hands, which was the biggest mistake he could make. Now he smelled like a zombie's armpit. He went running into the house, screaming for his mom, and slammed the door. The next hour was pure comedy. I saw him come out to his porch in his boxers, just holding his clothes with a pair of barbecue tongs. He threw them into the trash can at the curb. Then he spent 3 hours scrubbing his porch with a bucket of bleach. But the oil was already soaked into the wood. His entire front porch smelled like a dumpster for the next 2 weeks. The best part is he didn't know I had fixed the camera that morning, and I had the whole thing on video. Him stealing the box, the explosion, and everything, and his hilarious reaction. I didn't give the cops the video. Instead, I printed out a screenshot of him grabbing the box from my porch and taped it to the communal mailbox where everyone in the neighborhood could see it. Underneath, I wrote, "Kyle from House 42 is a porch pirate. He also smells like rotten eggs. You should ask him why." Kyle hasn't come out of his house during the day in over a month, and he waits until 2 a.m. to take out his trash. The best part is I haven't lost a single packet since. Moral of the story, if you're gonna steal from a dinosaur, you better be ready to smell like one. Not gonna lie, Kyle seemed to have it coming for him. I mean, anyone who steals packages is just a disgrace to this earth and deserves what they have coming for them. And I think this girl got the perfect revenge for Kyle. So, yeah, moral of the story, don't be out there stealing packages or you could stink for 2 weeks straight. Anyways, on to the next story. My influencer sister in law tried to use my wedding for content, so I gave her a main character moment she'll never forget. This user said, I, 27 female, just got married to my husband Leo, 28 male. Leo is amazing, but his sister Brittany, 24 female, is a nightmare. Brittany is a micro influencer and she has about 50,000 followers on TikTok and thinks that the entire world is just a backdrop for her aesthetic lifestyle. We got engaged, and the first thing that she said wasn't congratulations. It was, oh my god, your wedding is going to be so good for my engagement metrics. We need to make sure the lighting is perfect for my vlogs and videos. I told her right there and then, Brittany, this is a wedding, not a brand deal for you. There will be no filming during the ceremony. She just rolled her eyes and said, babe, you're so old school. Exposure is a gift. Fast forward to the wedding planning. Brittany tried to hijack everything. She wanted to change the bridesmaids' dresses to a specific trendy color that looked terrible on everyone else but great on her camera. She even tried to convince the caterer to give us a discount in exchange for a shout out on her story. The caterer laughed in her face. The week before the wedding, I found out through a mutual friend that Brittany was planning a surprise during the reception. She told her followers she was going to do a live transformation where she would change her outfit and hair in the middle of our dinner to show off a new clothing line that she was promoting. Basically, she was planning to turn my wedding reception into an advertisement. I sat her down and told her, if you bring a ring light or try to do a sponsored segment at my wedding, you are out and I'm serious. She cried, told Leo I was bullying her, and promised she'd just be a normal guest, but I knew Brittany and she doesn't do normal. I decided to prepare a little gift for her. I knew Brittany's biggest fear wasn't being hated, it was being embarrassed in front of all of her followers. I hired a special videographer and I told the rest of the guests he was there just for extra footage. But I gave him one specific job: follow around Brittany. I told him to film every time she made a fake influencer face, every time she spent 20 minutes trying to take a picture of her salad, and every time she ignored the actual wedding to talk to her phone. But the real pro revenge was the Wi Fi. Our venue was in a rural area with zero cell service, and the only way to get online was through the venue's private Wi Fi. I talked to the manager and asked him to create a specific guest Wi Fi login just for Brittany. I told him to set it up so that it looked like it was working, but it would throttle the speed almost to zero whenever she tried to upload a video. The reception started, and Brittany was in full work mode. She was ignoring her family, standing on chairs to get the shot, and literally shoving the photographer out of the way. I saw her go to the bathroom to do her live transformation. She came out in this bright neon green dress that completely clashed with the elegant theme that we picked. She stood up in the middle of the speeches, held up her phone, and started her live broadcast. I watched from the head table as her face went from happy influencer to total panic. She was hitting her phone, waving in the air, trying to get the live video to start. But because of the Wi-Fi settings, her streaming kept lagging, freezing on her and the most awkward facial expressions, and then cutting out. She spent the entire night stressed out, staring at a loading screen, while my special videographer caught every second of her looking like a crazy person. The next day, Brittany tried to post a recap video of how perfect the wedding was, and that's when I dropped my move. I posted the behind the scenes footage my videographer caught. It was a 3-minute montage of her being incredibly rude to the staff, blocking the bride's view, and her massive Wi-Fi meltdown. I captioned it, "What an influencer's perfect day actually looks like. Thanks for my exposure, Brittany." The video ended up actually going viral in our hometown, and her followers realized how fake her sweet persona was. She lost about 10,000 followers overnight and had to go private for a month. Leo was a bit annoyed, but after I showed him the footage of her almost knocking down our wedding cake to get a selfie, he admitted that she deserved it. So, if you try to turn my wedding into an ad, I will turn you into a meme. Yeah, honestly, I don't blame her. I mean, weddings are super expensive these days, and when you spend all this money on a wedding, you don't want someone running around trying to make it their own. Yeah, I would have done the same thing, and I'm sure that video is priceless. Anyways, let's get into the next story. My cheapskate boss tried to dock my pay for a company party, so I cost them his biggest client. I, 25 male, used to work for a small marketing firm run by a guy by the name of Rick. Rick was the kind of guy who drives a Porsche but complains that the office coffee filters are too expensive. He's a classic small business tyrant who thinks he's doing you a favor by letting you work 60 hours a week for a 40-hour salary. Last December, Rick announced he was throwing a mandatory holiday gala at a fancy hotel. He made a huge deal about it, saying it was a thank you for our hardest year yet. We all got dressed up, went to the party, and ate a mediocre chicken. We thought it was actually a nice gesture for once. The next week, I opened my paycheck and noticed it was $150 short. I checked with my coworkers, and everyone's check was missing the exact same amount. I went into Rick's office and asked him if there was a glitch in the payroll. Rick didn't even look up from his desk. He said, "No glitch, that's just the party contribution. The gala costs a lot of money, and since you guys were the only ones enjoying the food and drinks, it's only fair that you help cover the bill. Consider it an investment in company culture." I was stunned. "Rick, you said it was a gift, and you said it was mandatory. You can't charge us to attend a work event." He just laughed and said, "I'm the owner, I can do whatever I want, and if you don't like it, there's the door." He knew I needed that job to pay my rent, so he thought he had me cornered. He spent the rest of the day bragging about how much money he saved the company with his creative accounting. What Rick didn't know was that I was the primary contact for our biggest client, a massive tech company that provided 60% of our revenue. The CEO of the company, Susan, was a no-nonsense woman who hated bullies. She only worked with us because she liked my work ethic. I also knew that Rick was planning to charge Susan a holiday surcharge of $5,000 for work we haven't even done yet. He was basically double dipping, stealing from his employees and scamming his clients at the same time. I didn't quit immediately, but I waited until the day of our year-end strategy meeting with Susan. Rick had spent all morning practicing his pitch to get her to sign a new multi-million-dollar 3-year contract. He told us all to look sharp because his Christmas bonus depended on this deal. We got into the conference room with Susan, and her legal team, Rick, started his big boss presentation talking about how much he values transparency and partnership. When it was my turn to present the data, I accidentally opened the wrong file on the big screen. Instead of marketing stats, I opened a folder labeled Employee Gala Contributions. It showed a spreadsheet of every employee's name and the $150 that was illegally deducted from our checks. The room went silent. Susan leaned forward and said, "Rick, what exactly am I looking at?" Rick turned bright red. "Oh, that's just an internal team building exercise. Yeah, nothing to worry about." I spoke up and said, "Actually, Susan, Rick felt the company was struggling so much that we all had to pay for our own holiday party. That also is why he's adding $5,000 of an operational fee to your invoice this month to help cover the cost." Susan's face went cold. She looked at Rick and said, "I don't do business with people who steal from their own staff. It makes me wonder what else you're stealing." She stood up, gathered her files, and walked out. She canceled the contract that afternoon. Without 60% revenue, Rick's firm went from succeeding to a tailspin. He had to lay off half the staff, but I didn't really care because Susan called me an hour later and offered me a job at her company with a 40% raise. Rick tried to sue me for breach of contract, but since I was just showing him a file during the presentation, his lawyer told him he had no case. Rick had to sell his Porsche just to keep the lights on for another month. So, if you try to make your employees pay for the party, you're going to end up losing the whole house. Yeah, Rick got cooked on that one. I get it. Business is really hard, and sometimes you do have to cut costs where you can, but definitely you can't cut costs on the people who are keeping your business afloat because obviously something like this will happen. So, Rick is obviously not a good business owner. He doesn't care about his employees, and that came to bite him in the butt. So, now if you ever start a business, make sure to treat your employees right from day one because this will happen. Anyways, let's go ahead and take a look at the next story. Okay, here we go. My perfect sister stole my inheritance and my fiance, so I let her have exactly what she deserved. Now, this poster said, "This is a throwaway account because my family is very active on social media, and this would blow up my life if they found it before the legal papers were served." I, a 26-year-old female, have always been the disappointment of the family. Not because I'm a bad person, I do have a stable job in data analysis, I pay my own bills, and I've never been in trouble. But because my older sister, Vanessa, 29-year-old female, is the golden child. Vanessa is a professional influencer. She lives off my parents' credit cards and takes photos of herself in expensive cafes. She's gorgeous, charming, and has a way of making everyone believe she's a saint while she's actively stepping on your neck. 2 years ago, I thought I'd finally won at life. I was engaged to Mark, 30-year-old male. Mark was everything my family liked, wealthy, handsome, and from a good family. For the first time, my parents actually looked at me with something other than pity. Of course, Vanessa couldn't have that. About 6 months into my engagement, I started noticing things. Mark was distracted. Vanessa was suddenly everywhere. She'd show up at our apartment unannounced with coffee, wearing outfits that were definitely not meant for a casual sisterly visit. I tried to bring it up to my mom, but she told me I was being insecure and that Vanessa is just trying to be a supportive maid of honor. The breaking point came when our grandmother passed away. Grandma was the only person who saw through Vanessa's act. She and I were incredibly close. In her original will, she told me she was leaving me the house, a beautiful 1920s craftsman that's worth a fortune now, and her jewelry collection. She wanted me to have a head start in life because she knew my parents would always prioritize Vanessa. But when the will was read, everything had changed. A codicil had been added 3 weeks before my grandma died, while she was heavily medicated and frankly not lucid, leaving the house and the jewelry to Vanessa. Vanessa put on this huge performance, sobbing about how touched she was that grandma changed her mind. Her parents were thrilled, and of course I was devastated. Less than a month later, I came home early from a work trip and found Mark and Vanessa in my bed. Not just hanging out, it was a full-blown affair. Mark didn't even look guilty. He looked relieved. He told me that Vanessa understood his lifestyle better and that they were in love. Vanessa had the audacity to cry and say, "I didn't mean for this to happen, but we can't help who we love." I moved out that night, and my parents, they told me not to make a scene and that my family is more important than a man. They basically forced me to go to their engagement party 2 months later, too. I went, but I wasn't there to celebrate. See, while Vanessa was busy planning a happy family and being a homeowner, I was doing some digging. I work in data and forensics, and I know how to find things that people think are buried. First, I looked into the will. I found a lawyer who helped Vanessa's witness the codicil. Turns out he wasn't a lawyer. He was a guy Vanessa went to college with who had been disbarred for fraud. I managed to get a recording of him bragging about how he helped a friend secure the bag for a cut of the jewelry sale. Second, I looked into Mark's finances. Mark always bragged about his investments. It turned out his investments were actually a massive Ponzi scheme involving high-end real estate flipping. He was using his family's name to lure in investors, then using the new money to pay off the old ones. He was millions of dollars in the hole and desperately looking for a way out. That's when I realized why he jumped to Vanessa. He thought she was the one getting the inheritance, and he thought Grandma's house and jewelry were his free get out of jail card. I decided to play the long game. I didn't say a word, and I acted like the bigger person. I even helped Vanessa appraise Grandma's jewelry, except I didn't tell her that Grandma had replaced all the real stones with high quality lab grown fakes years ago for insurance reasons, and kept the real ones in a private safety deposit that she gave me the key to before she went to the hospital. But Vanessa thought she was sitting on $200,000 worth of diamonds, and in reality, they were worth maybe 5K. The revenge happened at their wedding. Vanessa wanted a royal wedding. She spent every cent of the inheritance money she thought she had on the venue, the dress, and the catering. She took out a massive personal loan, thinking she'd just sell Grandma's house after the wedding to cover it. The morning of the wedding, I sent 3 emails. Email 1 went to the actual estate lawyers and the police, containing the evidence of the fraudulent will codicil and the recording of Vanessa's lawyer friend. Email 2 went to the SEC and Mark's major investors with a detailed spreadsheet of his investments and where the money was actually going. Email 3 went to my parents with the photos of the lab-grown diamond certificates and the key to the real safety deposit box. I showed up to the wedding in a stunning black dress. Not a mourning sad dress, but a I'm the boss dress. During the toast, I didn't grab the mic and scream. I just sat there and waited. The police arrived later that night, right as they were cutting the cake. It was like a movie. They didn't just come for Mark, they came for Vanessa too regarding the estate fraud. The look on Vanessa's face when she realized the diamonds she was wearing were fake and that she was being detained for questioning in front of all of her influencer friends was better than any inheritance. Mark was arrested for securities frauds, and his wealthy family immediately disowned him to save their reputation, meaning he had no bail money. The house? The fraudulent codicil was tossed out. Because Vanessa had already spent the cash part of the inheritance, the court ordered a lien on her assets. She lost everything. My parents tried to beg me to save her, but I told them that family is more important than a man, but the law is more important than family. I ended up with the house. I sold it, bought a beautiful condo in a city 4 hours away, and started my own firm. Vanessa is currently living in her studio apartment, working a retail job she hates because no one wants to hire an influencer with a record for fraud. Mark is serving 5 to 7 years, and my parents keep calling me asking me for money to help Vanessa to get back up on her feet. I told them that I'd send some supportive photos of my new life. It's been 6 months and I've never slept better. Trust your gut, guys, because if someone wants to steal your life, let them. Just make sure the life they're stealing is a ticking time bomb. Not gonna lie, that would be a pretty difficult situation to be in just because it's hard, splitting up your family like that. Yeah, you got stabbed in the back by your sister and your fiance, but, ruining the whole family, it can be tough. So I kind of feel for both sides, honestly, even though Vanessa and Mark are definitely both in the wrong. But just having that family bond is worth a lot. But yeah, so I mean, you learn your lesson. There's nothing better than getting good revenge. So on to the next story. Okay, so the title of this one goes, My best friend stole my small business idea, so I gave her a version that was designed to fail. I, 27 female, have been obsessed with sustainable fashion since high school. For the last 3 years, I worked my tail off developing a very specific formula for a bio-based waterproof coating for outdoor gear. It was meant to be the holy grail of my upcoming brand, eco-friendly, breathable, and completely vegan. I had the prototypes, the manufacturing contracts, and a 50-page business plan ready to go. My supposedly best friend of 12 years, Sarah, who is 27 and a female, was the only person I trusted with the details. Sarah is the kind of person who is always between jobs, but somehow always has a new designer handbag. She is a professional social climber who knows how to charm people into giving her what she wants. Last summer, I invited her over to show her the final samples. I was so excited, I even showed her my digital black book, the list of niche suppliers and the specific chemical ratios for the coating. I told her I was planning to launch my Kickstarter in October. 2 weeks later, Sarah stopped answering my texts. A month later, I saw a sponsored post on Instagram. Sarah had launched Aura Shield. It was my brand, my aesthetic, my mission statement. She had used her family's connections to get a massive seed investment and had fast tracked a launch using the exact suppliers from my list. I was pissed. I called her and she actually had the nerve to say, "Business is business, babe. You were talking too long to pull the trigger. I just helped the world see your vision faster." Then she blocked me. What Sarah didn't know is that the black book I showed her wasn't the final version. I'm a bit paranoid by nature, so I kept my actual final formulas in a physical notebook. The digital file she saw and took pictures of contained version 4. Version 4 was honestly a disaster. On the surface, it looks and feels perfect. It's shiny, it's waterproof, and it smells like lavender. But it has one fatal scientific flaw. It's chemically unstable when exposed to prolonged UV lights and high humidity. After about 60 days of real world use, the biobase begins to break down. It doesn't just peel, it turns into a sticky, sap like goo that smells like rotting vinegar. It also permanently stains whatever clothing is underneath it. I knew Sarah wouldn't do the months of wear testing. She's an aesthetic person, not a quality person. She wanted the launch party and the founder title. I stayed silent. I didn't sue. I didn't post a call out thread. I just watched to see what happened. Sarah's launch was huge. She got featured in a few major tech and fashion blogs. She sold her first limited edition run of 5,000 jackets at $400 a pop, and she sold out. She was living the high life, posting photos from a celebratory trip to Tulum, probably paid for with the pre-order money. Then the 60-day mark hit. It started with one or two comments on her Instagram of, "Hey, why is my sleeve sticky?" Then the floodgate opens. Because she had marketed these as high-end adventure gear, people were wearing them on hikes and in the rain. The UV light from the sun triggered the reaction and the humidity accelerated it. Thousands of jackets were turned into vinegar-scented flypaper simultaneously. The backlash was glorious. Because the coating ruined the expensive clothes people wore underneath, they weren't just asking for refunds, they were demanding compensation for the ruined wardrobes. Sarah had spent all the investment money on marketing and her own lifestyle, so she really had no capital to handle the returns. The investors realized she didn't actually understand the science of her own product. When they dug into her research and development, they found she had no testing logs and had basically just handed a factory a stolen, untested recipe. They pulled their funding and sued her for breach of contract and gross negligence. The Aura Shield website vanished overnight. Sarah's influencer career is dead, and she had to move back in with her parents and is currently facing a class action lawsuit from angry customers. Last month, I finally launched my actual brand, Verdant Outpost, using the real formula. Because Sarah had poisoned the well for her specific type of biocoating, I was able to buy the remaining stock of her failed jackets from the liquidators for pennies on the dollar. I stripped the old coating, applied the correct one, and sold them as a recycled line. I'm currently wearing one of those jackets. It's perfectly dry, it doesn't smell like vinegar, and best of all, it didn't cost me a dime of Sarah's stolen money to produce. If you're gonna steal someone's work, you should probably make sure you know how it works first. So yeah, I mean, this one is tough. Friends, when you get friends involved with money, you start to see who they really are. And while, yeah, technically Sarah did have the right to make the business hers because there's no patents or anything on it, she obviously didn't take the time to, research what was going to happen and she paid for it. So it stinks to see a friendship lost over this, but I think Sarah got what she deserved by trying to rip off her friend for a quick buck. So don't do that. Anyways, let's look and listen to the next story. Okay, here we go. So the title of this one is "My HOA Tried to Foreclose on My Ugly House while I was deployed. So I came back and dismantled their entire organization. So this poster said, I, a 32-year-old male, am a civil engineer and a officer in the Army Reserves. About 4 years ago, I bought a fixer-upper in a quiet, older neighborhood. It wasn't really a fun house. It was more of a 1960s rancher that had been neglected for probably a decade. It sat on a massive double lot, which was the main reason I bought it. My plans were to spend the weekends gutting it and turning it into my forever home. The neighborhood didn't have a HOA at the time when I bought it. However, a year into my ownership, a group of concerned neighbors led by a woman that I'll call Beverly, probably mid-60s female, managed to push through a mandatory HOA. They used some obscure local statute that allowed them to form one if certain percentage of residents signed on. I fought it, but I was outvoted by the retirees who had nothing better to do than obsess over their lawn height. Beverly became the HO president, and she hated my house. She hated that I had a vintage truck in the driveway, which I was restoring. She hated that my lawn wasn't a monoculture of the Bermuda grass. She sent me fines weekly, and I paid them just to keep the peace, but I did document everything and kept working on my renovations. Then I got my orders. I was being deployed for 12 months. Before I left, I met with the HOA board and I explained the situation. I showed them my orders and set up an automatic payment for my dues. I hired a professional landscaping company to mow the lawn every 2 weeks and kept the exterior tidy. I even gave my sister power of attorney to handle any emergencies, and I thought I was covered. 6 months into my deployment, my sister called me in a panic. She had gone by the house to check the mail and found a notice for foreclosure taped to the front door. I was livid. I contacted the HOA's management company from overseas, and they told me that I had multiple outstanding violations and unpaid fines totaling over $15,000. Because the fines hadn't been paid, they had placed a lien on the house and started the foreclosure process. I asked for a breakdown of the fines, and Beverly had been busy. This is what she's fining me for: unauthorized exterior modifications, improper landscaping, presence of a derelict vehicle, and failure to respond to my board inquiries. The inquiries were sent via certified mail to my house, not my sister or military address, even though I had provided both when I left. When I didn't respond because I was literally in a different time zone, they added a $500 contempt fine every single week. I told my sister to hire the meanest real estate and military rights attorney she could find. My lawyer sent a stay of proceedings under the Service Member Civil Right Relief Act, which basically says you can't foreclose on a soldier while they're being deployed. Beverly's response: she told the court that I had abandoned the property and the SCRA didn't apply because the house was a public nuisance. The judge didn't buy it and froze everything, but the damage was done. They had already entered my property, remandated my yard by ripping out $4,000 worth of native landscaping I'd planted, and someone had accidentally broken the window into my garage, leading to water damage on my truck's interior. I spent the rest of my deployment planning. As a civil engineer, I deal with permits, zoning, and land surveyors every day. I know how to read the fine print. When I got home, I didn't go to a board meeting to scream. I went there to the county records office. I spent 3 weeks digging. I found something incredible. The mandatory HOA that Beverly had formed was built on a lie. To legally form the HOA, they needed 75% of the homeowners to sign the petition. I started calling the names on that original list. I found 10 homeowners who had moved away years ago, but their signatures were on the document. I had found 5 signatures from people who were deceased at the time of signing. Beverly had nearly forged 20% of the signatures to reach the threshold. But I didn't stop there. I looked at the land survey for the neighborhood, and Beverly's house sat on the corner of the main entrance. When she had opened her dream pool and pool house built 5 years ago, she had extended her fence line. According to the original plot maps, Beverly had built her pool house and half on her deck on city-owned easement land designed for future drainage expansions. Not only was it on city land, but it was also built directly over a major utility main. She had never pulled a permit for it because she knew that it would be denied. I also looked into the HOA's management company, and it turned out the company was owned by Beverly's son in law, and the fines I had been paying, most of that money was going into a community fund. Most of that money had not been going into a community fund. It was being funneled into consulting fees paid to a shell company Beverly owned. It was time for the great unveiling. I called an emergency neighborhood meeting and I didn't tell Beverly what it was about. I just used my rights as a homeowner to demand a meeting to discuss the foreclosure status. When the meeting started, Beverly was smug. She started talking about maintaining standards and how some people aren't meant for this community. I stood up, opened my laptop, and projected my findings onto the wall of the community center. First, I showed the forged signatures. I had three of the signers there in person, all elderly. I had three of the so-called signers there in person, all elderly residents who testified they had never seen that document, and the room went silent. Next, I showed the financial records. I showed exactly how much of their monthly dues was going directly into Beverly's pocket via her son-in-law. The neighbors started murmuring, and these were the people who had lived there for 30 years, and they realized they had been robbed. Then I dropped the nuclear bomb. I showed the survey map of Beverly's property. I said, I've already contacted the city's planning department. Since Beverly's pool house is an illegal structure on a public easement and sits on a high pressure water main, the city has issued a mandatory demolition order. They will be here Monday to begin tearing it down at her expense. The chaos was beautiful. Beverly turned into a shade of purple I didn't even know existed, and her son-in-law tried to bolt for the door, but a neighbor who was a retired cop blocked him. As for me, the fallout was total. The HOA was declared null and void by the court due to the fraud, and all the residents were refunded their dues for the past 3 years from the frozen HOA accounts. Beverly was charged with multiple counts of fraud and forgery. Her pool house, deck, and half of her award-winning gardens were bulldozed by the city because she had built on a utility easement and her homeowner's insurance wouldn't cover a dime of the demolition or loss in property value. She had to sell her house to pay back the consulting fees she had embezzled, and she ended up moving into a tiny rundown apartment across town. As for me, I'd use the settlement money from my lawsuit against her and the defunct HOA to finish my reservations. My house is now the nicest one on the block. It's painted in a bold, dark navy blue with cedar accents, the exact opposite of what the eggshell white was required for the HOA. I still have the notice of foreclosure framed in my hallway because it reminds me that as an engineer, I don't just build buildings, I know exactly how to take them apart. So yeah, I feel like HOAs are literally designed to benefit the people running them. I don't know a single person who lives in a development with a HOA that actually enjoys having an HOA. People just complain about them because they do stuff like this. They take advantage of the homeowners for no reason. They complain when things aren't right and you have to pay them. So yeah, I feel like on behalf of all the people that live in developments, this guy really got his revenge for everybody. Anyways, let's see what the next story is. Okay, so this one reads, my roommate accidentally deleted my 80-page thesis, so I made sure he failed his entire semester. This poster said, I, a 22-year-old male, just finished my senior year of college. My roommate Tyler was the guy everyone warned me about, but I didn't listen because we had been friends since the middle school. Tyler was a gifted kid who hit a wall in college. He spent 90% of his time playing League of Legends and the other 10% complaining about how his professors didn't understand his genius. I, on the other hand, am a grinder. I am a history and political science double major, and for my honors capstone, I spent 8 months researching and writing an 80-page thesis on the socioeconomic impacts of Silk Road. It was my baby. It was the difference between me graduating with honors and getting into a top-tier law school, or just being another guy with a degree. Tyler was struggling. He was a computer science major on his last leg. He had failed operating systems twice, and if he didn't pass his final projects, a, compli- a complex compiler he had to build from scratch, he was going to be kicked out of the program. A week before finals, the tension in our dorm room was a solid wall. I was doing my final citations, and Tyler was staring at a blank IDE, vibrating with stress. 2 days before my thesis was due, I went to the dining hall to grab a quick coffee, and I left my laptop open on my desk. I was only gone for 15 minutes when I came back and my laptop was shut. When I reopened it, my heart stopped. My entire thesis folder was gone. Not in the trash, not in the recent documents, just completely gone. I checked my cloud backup and it was empty. Tyler had been helping me set up a local server for my backups for months prior, and he had configured it so that everything synced to a physical drive he kept on his desk. I looked at Tyler. He didn't even look up from his monitor. "Hey man," he said, sounding fake casual. "I think your laptop had a glitch and it started making this weird noise, so I tried to refresh the drive for you. I think some of the files might have gotten wiped. My bad, man." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Tyler, that was 8 months of work. Where is the backup drive?" "Oh," he said, finally looking at me with this smug, pitying grin. "That drive crashed this morning. Totally fried. Man, that sucks. You really should have kept hard copies." I knew instantly he was not sorry. He was failing, and he couldn't stand that I was succeeding. He had deleted my work out of pure, concentrated spite because he wanted company in his misery. I didn't scream, I didn't hit him, I just sat down, walked to the library, and spent the next 48 hours in a caffeine fueled fugue state. I had an older draft from 3 weeks prior on a thumb drive in my bag that he didn't know about. It wasn't perfect, but I stayed awake for 2 days straight, reconstructing the missing 20 pages from memory and my notes. Then I submitted it 3 minutes before the deadline. I got an A minus, but Tyler didn't know that. I let him believe I was ruined. I walked around the dorm looking like a ghost, pretending I was going to have to take a gap year. He was so supportive, patting me on the back while hiding a smile. Now here's where the revenge comes in. Remember that compiler project Tyler had to finish to graduate? He was working on it using a private GitHub repository. Because he had set up my backup server on his machine, I had his admin credentials saved in my browser's keychain. 2 nights before his project was due, Tyler finally finished his code. He was bragging about it, saying that it was the best work he's ever done, and he pushed the final commit to his repo and went to sleep, planning to submit the link to his professor in the morning. While he was snoring, I logged into his GitHub. I didn't delete his codes because that would be way too obvious. Instead, I went into his header files and made 3 tiny changes. I changed a single semicolon to a Greek question mark. They look identical to the naked eye, but they cause the compiler to throw a syntax error that would be notoriously hard to track down because the character is technically a different Unicode symbol. I altered his memory allocation logic so that it worked perfectly for a small test case, but triggered a massive buffer overflow and crashed the entire system the moment a file larger than 10 kilobytes was processed. I added a hidden comment deep in the logic that said, "This code was generated using unauthorized AI assistance and pure theft logic." I pushed the fixes to his repo using a script that made it look like the changes were made during his own final session. The next morning, Tyler woke up, saw his code compiled on his local machine, and submitted the GitHub link to his professor with a flourish. 3 days later, the grades came out. Tyler didn't just fail the project, he was called into the dean's office. Because of the hidden comment I left, they flagged him for academic dishonesty. When he tried to prove he wrote it by running the code for them, the Greek question mark caused the program to fail before even starting. Even when he fixed that in a panic, the buffer overflow crashed the department's testing server. He was expelled for 2 weeks before graduation, no degree, no genius reputation, just 4 years of tuition down the drain. He came back to the dorm crying, screaming that someone must have hacked him, and he looked at me begging for help because I was the smart one. I just looked at him, pulled up my grades on my laptop, and showed him my A minus on the Silk Road thesis. "Man, that sucks," I said, repeating his words back to him perfectly. "I guess your computer had a glitch. You really should have kept the hard copies." He turned white, and he realized in that moment that I knew what he had done and that I had buried him. I moved out the next day, and I'm starting law school in the fall. Tyler is currently working at a car wash in our hometown, still trying to figure out how to debug his life. Don't mess with the history major's footnotes, and definitely don't let a comp sci major think they're the only ones who know how to use a keyboard. Yeah, not gonna lie, that's pretty brutal. I mean, ruining your, I guess, so-called friend's entire college career and like making him waste all that time in tuition. That's pretty brutal. That is some revenge if I've heard anything. But that's what happens when you get jealous. Obviously, he was jealous that you know he was doing better than him and he was actually putting the work in. And yeah, that's what happens when you try to get revenge without being able to cover your tracks. But anyways, I hope you guys really enjoy this video. I really do enjoy making these videos, so make sure to hit that subscribe button if you want to see more videos like this in the future. And I will see you here back for the next one.